getting pretty comfortable as the summer sun comes in. I notice the lizards popped out. It means that the crickets have been there doing nothing. Or at least nothing that's supposed to be done right. And the people who are doing wrong against you don't care whether you do nothing or do it wrong. They do care when you start to do it right. And I've seen this over and over for years. Try to bring some of these experiences and these observations to you every week. Hopefully to get you to do something to defend yourself with all the complaints I see. I guess I would have nothing really to say if no one was complaining. But lots of people complain. And then do nothing. And it's not because they're helpless. Interesting little tale comes up. You hear it from the people that are the movers and the shakers of the mind controllers. And it's interesting. I've never, coming into all this internet stuff many years ago now, but late to the game, if you will. Lots of people were on air doing broadcasts. I didn't even know how to get in there. Didn't have the right stuff to do it. So I come late to the game about all this, listening to people making comments and things already, and saying, wait, no, they're not researching enough to find out really what's going on. They like to yell and scream. And one of those guys was already on, and it was interesting because at the time I started to become aware of this Alex Jones, I was in peg access like he was. And I was amazed at how fast he came up, and how fast he came into popularity. Watching him go from peg access, like where I was, and moving and up through where he now is, but now we'll see what he is. At the same time, I'm moving through peg access, trying to gain my broadcast qualities to get into, if you will, the PBS type circuit, because there's this little jump you have to do, and it's a technical expertise. I get beat down. So there's a little stark difference between, I was amazed that he could do it. I was happy for him at the time. And then I got on the internet, and then I got to listening, and against what my studies were that started way back at least in earnest on the points I talk about today were probably beginning 90s. So just in the middle beginning 90s. And I'm starting to listen to people, and I said, no, there's something wrong here. Yeah, there's these things you can know, but doesn't take you in those directions. And the response to that information isn't proper. If there's a response, it ought to be had. And then I started to realize and become more of the vernacular that goes on, that you hear, and then you find out, you listen very carefully, and all these words like COINTELPRO and all this, is you understand that that's the game. That's what you're in. And a little story pops up from Alex Jones out of his own mouth to tell you what he's all been about. And I'm amazed that there's millions and millions of people that come and listen to his stuff and get the grains of some of the truth, but will reside in that. And that's the thing that bothers me a lot, because I know this thing is a war against your life. It's against you, unless your life, against you, literally, against you. And then it's against the way of life that you have, wherever you live in the world. And no, everyone wants to point out the sensationalism, but no one wants to point out that you have an obligation to stop what you see as sensational. And everybody rests in that point. It's like they all want to be victims. In fact, the defense that he's bringing up is almost a victimization defense. It's pretty fascinating to watch these people who know what they're doing do it. There's a little story that pops up about this guy that everyone listens to called Alex Jones. And he's coming out of the Sandy hoax thing. And he's being charged with violating people because he said it was a hoax. And I've told you where my focus is on that. Is that people can die. It's like 9/11 happened. But did you find out who pulled the triggers? And you never really will. You'll always have a suspicion, and then they use that suspicion to go on for decades, because you're not, as long as you have a suspicion and you keep studying it, and you keep thinking you're going to get an answer, they win because they're on to the next plan against you. So out comes this court case with the Sandy Hook hoax claims that he was making and all this other stuff. We hear the term false flag. We hear the term you can be part of something that's real, and it's not your plan. We hear how the government's integrated in all of this stuff. I don't care how far back you go. This is before 9/11. As I told you, the FBI gave the plan in a picture to the so-called terrorists of an airplane going into the towers. That was during the trial for the ones that the bombing of the towers underneath in the basement. These stories are going always on and on and on. So it's not even mine to say, I'm not even here to say that none of this stuff doesn't happen. It all happens. But who's running the game? Who's running the show? Who keeps you fixed and fascinated? And then these people pop up. Now I can't say much for someone's private charisma before everybody. There's some of that too. I certainly don't have any of that. Come pretty here dry just to say the same old stuff is really boring for a lot of people. But behind the woodshed is not a fun place. No one wants to really show up and stick around and then actually get the lessons and go out and live their life the way they ought to in responsibility. And Alex Jones blames Psychosis for Sandy Hook hoax claim. Remember, he also blamed performance art. The Psychosis is a psychotic, self-admitted. This could be a defense. The point is that millions of people listen to this guy. And will continue to listen to him. You think that pulling him off of all the social networks made him disappear? No, it makes him stronger. In fact, I saw a new vaccination movie showing the horrors of vaccinations, and now these movies are coming out with more and more proof, not just opinions and statements and hysterics. The Twitter knocked out this. I can't remember now what the name of the vaccine program is. It's just out now. They took out their account. That brought more attention to them than when the account was up. And so this is how this little game gets played, and you all could be into it. Some of you don't care about him, and that's fine, but I look at it a little differently. It's not about not being listening to someone because they just do this nonsense. It's that you're not turning around and saying, well, that's a Psy-Op as well, and we need to do something. That is countering what we need to do, because everybody's sitting in their seats in the Coliseum watching. Alex Jones, the Austin-based provocateur, embroiled in several lawsuits filed by parents of the victims of 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, said that in a deposition released Friday that his conspiracy thinking is kind of a mental disorder. I have no need to read more. That's out of his own words. He calls it a psychosis. However that's being used, he also said it's in performance art. So he says he really believes what he's saying when he's doing his performance art. But it's based on a psychosis. To me, this is like the breads and circuses brigade, and it's not limited to people like Alex Jones. It's really unlimited. It's really the thing you see that social media has become. It's all media. So I say when I tell you something behind the woodshed, I give you a source, and I say go research it and see it for yourself. Don't just take my word for all this. And then when you see what I show you, and you should have been interested for a purpose, a reason, a purpose for it, go now act through that knowledge. Go take action through the knowledge, not the hysteria or the semantics or the psychosis or the performance art. And that's part of, in me, is a little bit of resentment, if you will, if I even raise it that level. That there's people that listen, there's millions and millions of people that listen to people like Alex Jones who will tell you he does performance art at Psychosis, false flags, the MSM is nonsense, we see fake news. I told you that's all fraud, folks. It's all fraud. And people agree with it. They sit there and they'll watch it. While this place we call our home, our country, for those of you that even would destroy that notion, and I know, again, I go through all these definitions. They're so wrong. People buy into these wrong interpretations of definitional basis to think they understand the world. They have no clue they're wrong. And they buy into it. I saw another one defining the word government, going through this iteration on how you can say it's mind control. It's not, folks. Not at all. I wouldn't go down that track. I already told you how it's not. It's just a contortion of what people bring on. It becomes all this nonsense and noise. And in the meantime, all the nonsense and the noise, the people that are harming you continue to harm you. But you all sit in justification of your knowledge. And I said knowledge means nothing. You can contemplate your navel and how much you know all you want. The people, Genghis Khan and his horde will come against you. You're not. It doesn't matter how peaceful you want to be. And this is just the history of man. Yeah, his story. Usually the men did it. And then justified it. We're watching that happening today with the divine right of caucustocracy having all right at all because they just have the biggest club. Whether that becomes a military club, an economic club, controlling club of any nature. And we all sit back and watch that without really a word other than just our complaint. So so I have a little bit of dismay, I think, more than anything else, why people would listen to people like Alex Jones, who admits to you what he's doing. He's performance art. He's suffering through a psychosis. And you continue to listen to that. Or you don't, and then you shut your mind off like you think you know enough. And don't do anything. Again, okay, I'm a harpy. You got to do something. I mean, I could go on and on and on here. I guess maybe I am right now. Miners are doing this all the time. Working with another miner here the other day, or just a couple days ago. Really intelligent guy. We're going to get him to do the right stuff instead of all the wrong stuff. But he wasn't aware of even the simple stuff. And like I've told you all, sometimes it doesn't matter. You sit there content in your chair or in your room or in your house in your little jail. You think you are not living in a jail just because you get out in a car and go drive somewhere and come back. You don't think that's a jail. And you think that the world's a nice place and you think everyone's going to follow no law at all, but that's going to be peaceful. And you don't respond to this stuff, and then one day it comes knocking on your door. And for me, I get to talk with miners who have property rights and people don't believe it's there and they don't believe there's a law, but I can show real quickly how the law is sitting there. And I can show how to expose how these people that come through throw a taw are just that. They're coming in a costume. They're lacking authority. And I don't know why more people don't want to know that, so they could out this stuff right in place. And anyway, so I'm just dismayed that people would resort to listening to someone who admits he's doing performance art and is suffering is a psychotic. How psychotic is our society to allow that? And I just don't understand it, because that's the difference, folks. If you stop doing that, or if you start even disregarding it because it is that, it doesn't make sense to begin with, but you don't do anything further, you're allowing this nonsense to come on us. And I can point a number of ways that we're being invaded as a people. And I don't mean that just in the United States. The United States, I think, is the most powerful because it's land disposal stuff. But it's in every nation. We can find this nonsense coming in, and I don't know why people don't step up wherever they are to stop it. And stop listening to these psychotics. So here, he admits to himself, it's his words, not mine. And why I only get a couple handfuls of people listening, and these guys get thousands and millions, is indicative of the problem we have in this country. And if you think that indicative problem is going to resolve itself, well, in other words, like my tweeters I put, what do you call them? Put them out, that don't fix itself, folks. It's going to need some help. And at any rate, I'll say this over and over. We are surrounded. We're infiltrated and surrounded in mind control. It's not the government. It's you. It's you where you put your mouse clicks. And all the people that aren't listening to me got their mouse clicked in the wrong place, apparently. If our intention is to get to a better place than where we've been driven by those that occupy us. So let's go on. I just don't know, folks. Again, I just look at this. I don't need the numbers. The numbers only indicate that people are focusing on. Doesn't mean that they're acting, but the numbers listening would mean that at least we have a chance to pull this off. I look at this and it's looking. I've told you before. It's pretty bleak. What a fool's errand I am on. They gave us too much credit, apparently. I mean the real credit, the one that they call debt. And you buy into sustainably because you just let their alternatives win over the day without supplying your own lifestyle against their invasion. It's nonsense. I keep thinking about that. I start stuttering. It's so easy to defeat these people. It's just nonsensical. But now, let me jump over real quick to this another thing that just I guess I get a little bit perturbed as well. I keep talking to you about how to do things, and everyone that says that they're interested in certain things that I see have a complaint will never step up to defend that thing that they think that they said that they were interested in. And one of my observations on that was the cannabis. People didn't step up. We got a couple of you that did. Thank you very much for doing that little bit. Again, but as I remind myself here, what is this, long time into the broadcast, get into my thoughts. This will be for the past cast, podcast, recast, whatever you want to cast. The cast on your arm, the cast on your foot. When you go to look for this broadcast, it'll be BTWRLM 312. If you want to see the content and lead with links to source documents and beginnings to get your trail built, to go do the thing you want to get done, made right. I was talking last week, and again, the cannabis, a couple of you stepped up, a lot of you didn't, still complain, but telling you last week that Oregon had proposed a bill by the Democrats, and I told you how that was all messed up and an alternative that couldn't fly, but because it's the Democrats and they don't, not just because they're Democrats, it's not that I support the Republicans, because they're letting this happen as well, but anyway, there was they produced an alternative to the banking industry to allow cannabis banking for the businesses. And I talked to you last week about that, and I told you, let's focus on this is an alternative that they're trying to do. I want to touch back base on this. So I'm kind of critical of those of you that do cannabis and don't get more involved with the simple letter writing stuff that can start swaying people's minds to bring this thing to an end, the stupidity to an end. This is a bigger issue too, because if you can start doing that, you can start actually impressing upon the war on drugs, and if you can get that to end, then we give the government a lot less onus, proprietorship on what they've been doing against us. And I look down the road a little bit, whether maybe you do, maybe you don't, I don't know, but it's a step-by-step process because they've overwhelmed us, so we can't get it all at one time, at least my view. And if you have a bigger action or a better action that's definitive to really take down the whole thing, I'd like to hear it, but I haven't found that works so well. We're out of position, outmanned, outmachined, out everything, and yet we still make some advances. And the way we do it is we just slow down, we look very carefully at the battlefield, and we take, it's like sniper shots on the enemy. We hit it a little bit at a time, one shot at a time, and we make our ground back. And so I pointed out for y'all cannabis, I said, hey, those of you that are into cannabis, here's a way to engage. Also, I was talking about sound money. The alternative last week was they were going to make up this special non-chartered system inside the state where ultimately it was the state getting theirs and leaving everybody else out. And I said, well, they called it an alternative. Why don't you bring in this world of alternative dispute resolution and not law? Only policy. It's always been policy, at least since the 50s that I can tell in most places, if not before that. And I don't want to get into a debate on when, because I can keep going back, but I mean, for most people to check out for the state level, it started happening about the 50s, that we worked into policy and not law. And I found out one of the heads of the same state, Oregon, the Senate, he knows he's a legislator that only enacts policy as a so-called lawmaker. They know they only do policy. If you look at the front end of your statute, it'll tell you it's policy. So this is just a big policy, not law. And so you have the right to bring law back as the people. That you're the de jure power, but you don't, because you're crickets. And this is how fast it starts to turn when you start really knowing your rights and really saying, hey, they've been invaded and taken down, and I'm going to reinsert them. Now you start to become more of the formidable thing that we were supposed to be in a country that's supposed to keep that republic, for the United States anyway, that was not supposed to allow these, whatever you call them, coming over us, the partnerships, the team players, the advisory councils, the corporations, whatever your complaint is about what you think is coming down. So I said, for those in cannabis, you can step up and you can bring sound money. You know, I was speaking impliedly. I didn't, go off too far. I'm speaking to all you folks that used to say, end the Fed. I'm speaking to all you folks that said, I want to have a monetary system where inflation doesn't eat my life away. I'm speaking to all you folks that are using the fiat and call fiat what it is and then degrade it, but never stood up. I told you last week, this is where you stood up in this cannabis question on an alternative. Now, what I didn't do is go around, and I said there was a couple. There's actually more now, I find out, on the states that have these bills about cannabis. About the money. About gold and silver. About it being the so-called legal tender. And this is the interesting flip. You see the inversion of the actual logic here. It's not legal tender. It's lawful money. But see, because it's an inversion of law and policy, that system can only deal with things in a certain way. And we've all allowed that adulteration. And so we have an ability, for all of you that said in the Fed, and I was talking last week, and you didn't jump on this point in your state to vote, to validate whether or not you could do this, and then maybe move to help people in other states to do this. What is it, the Vermont or something, the No State Project? You folks are, I don't hear any of these people. Maybe I'm out of touch that far. I don't hear anybody jumping on all of this, how to bring lawful money back. This is the way you do it. That last story I told you about the Oregon looking for an alternative for the cannabis growers to be able to get back into the system is an opportunity. Well, it just so happens, after the broadcast, it accidentally ran across a couple links regarding the states that have done this so-called legal tenderization. I guess that's what you do with your meat as well. You tenderize it. Of gold and silver. And it happened to be with taxation. They were taxing as a commodity like bullion. That was one of the problems. But let me go. I'll give you a link later. I'm not going to talk about it too much. But one thing that pointed out that was really fascinating when you go through and look at this stuff. In Idaho, they're describing HB 206. In Idaho, they're doing this. Gold and silver is an alternative to holding Federal Reserve notes, and it is the only alternative that the U.S. Constitution says that the state can allow as other currency. It's unfair to tax it just as it is unfair to tax losses on a Federal Reserve note. Folks, there's the answer right there. What I told you last week, it's the alternative that you need to supply. It's being done in other states, and recognize if it's not in your state. This is the alternative I've been telling you. You need to you want to end the Fed for you. That's the only decision you have. Stop dealing in its products and stop dealing in its services like the clearinghouses. This is the opportunity. Did I see anybody coming to me in an email and saying, oh, you know, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to go engage this thing. I'm going to go help Oregon go the right direction. I'm going to try, and then I'm going to look at the failures of maybe other states, because there might be I haven't looked at this for this. I noticed there's a couple of little things that I'm not so clear about that I would want to double check on. But they're not big enough to say to not engage. I'm talking, see, I told you folks, you listen behind me and you listen long enough, I'm really condemning you. At some point I'm going to find something that you've been complaining about in the past, and that I'm telling you at any point I come along that subject matter, I'll show you where your inaction has continued to allow your complaint. You're just a victim of your own self-inflicted wound. For those of you that wanted to end the Fed, how much did I hear that when I started broadcasting 10 years ago? I don't even hear much about it anymore. But this is how you do it for you. You end the Fed by bringing on what? What does Idaho say? The only alternative to the Federal Reserve note is gold and silver coin. This cannabis issue can be used as a stepping stone to get us back. How many people contacted me that said that they thought that was an interesting thing and they're going to move on it? Zero, folks. We're toast. We're toast. We're toast. I don't know what to say. I'm just done. I'm going to just end this broadcast. We're toast until you come and tell me how it's going to be different when we're not acting against these simple actions to bring law back. And then you complain there's no law. Yeah, because you occupied territory by foreigners. They're not going to listen to your law. You're in a military occupation. They're not going to listen to your law. You're in a corporate overthrow. They're not going to listen to your law. And then it's only by law, and then we get to the word as money, as law. They say your laws are as, your policies are as law, your administrative power is as law, your fiat currency is as money. When we get to the stuff itself, no, crickets is what we get. I'm getting annoyed again, I can tell. Idaho, the only alternative to holding Federal Reserve. I just love this paper. It went through all kinds of states that are actually doing this at different levels. That I think, I'm going to give you a link here after the broadcast and the broadcaster if you want it. Go through, read this stuff, look carefully in it, and then go engage this to start using the cannabis problem and the federal fight between the federal criminalization of marijuana versus the hemp even, and the monetization for cannabis and medical, and that fight between the state and the federal government is your way back to the fundamental law. But you have to be there to reassert it. And you offer it, even in the language of today, the alternative. I don't know why this is so hard for people, and why when you hear this, you kind of don't get a little bit excited and say, well, that is a different opportunity to go at, or isn't it? And then go in and develop develop your lines back into something we never were practicing. We were told to do it. None of us like to do it, but that we find out we must do it. Engage a system, people that are in the system that find the validity in what you're saying, and then bring this stuff back. Offer this as an alternative. I think, my colleagues will be, I think we're already trying to get this thing through for Oregon on the Senate side, which would be, in a way, it's kind of like a bad way to go, but we do have an inroad possibly on the Senate side, because when a bill goes in, it has to be matched on the Senate side before it passes law. And we will have, hopefully, someone that can put in a better alternative than the Democratic Party view of sustainable debt and federal connection, sitting to face off against the Democratic-controlled House and Senate there, to face off with the lawful response. And we hope that they would go the right and lawful way, and then what that does is it brings what? It brings a separation, the alternative to the Federal Reserve System. It brings the fulfillment of those of you said in the Fed. It brings that to fulfillment for you and each one of you that would tie into that. It brings the separation from the Fed and the inflation and the debasing of your value from into production and the gold, which is still a product of production. You start to see the distinction between to wealth and a stable society and production versus the commerce connection, control, and destruction. It starts to show itself right there for any of you that wouldn't even consider mining law. I'm talking property law. I've always has been. So each one of you could have ended the Fed. That little path, there's tons to read here, but I'm not going to do it. I'd just rather talk, I guess. Idaho tells you that the only alternative, gold and silver is the only alternative to this whole system. Where have you all been that you haven't embraced it before? Where have you been since I just told you last week that the cannabis problem and this federal fight between the state and the federal and the monetization for the cannabis producer for their entry into the economy, the primary economy, why wasn't that used for you as an objective advantage and an alternative that you could produce to get you off the Fed? It's amazing to me to watch. I don't know what to say. Why don't you act? Why don't you respond? I'm offering you answers, at least the way I see them as they come at me, on the cuff, if you will, to see it. I say, okay, here, this is how this all works. We have an opportunity, and I get no response, and I get nobody responding, and yet I hear all the complaints, in the Fed, or money's debased, the fiat, Federal Reserve, and stop all, we're getting destroyed, or debasing our value of taxes and money, food's going up in price. But none of you step up, you just complain. And I gave you another answer. Cannabis, those of you in cannabis, and those of you that want to end the Fed and don't want to use a fiat and get tired by the system. No, you didn't step up. You have two aspects of society, the production and the wealth transfer medium that is separate and the alternative to the federal system. And you did embrace it and have it. Do I hope that you change your mind about that and actually do something? Yeah, absolutely. I know this is over. Anybody I work with, we impose the law that no one thinks is there, their life is different. You want to end the Fed? You want to end an agency intrusion? You want to end a police interaction? You make a record ahead of time of the fact of their lack of authority. Until they show themselves the next step as being a true criminal, they do nothing further. You make the alternative and to get gold and silver. I'm not going to say it's really going to be that easy yet because our minds and our habits are not there, but we can make now the intention and give ourselves permission. Like I said, you want to say, I have a right to do this. Well, no, you don't. You need to be given permission because your life and your peaceful life is not determined by you, is it? No, it's determined by the next guy with a gun who's too smart to be handling that gun and too psychologically stable to be not too psychologically stable to be able to handle that gun, but you're going to face when you go and try and do what you think is your rights because you never stood up to stop it in the first place. No, you didn't even go in and change the policy for those guys that would do that to you. You think doing nothing is the best answer, and this stuff is the caucusocracy, the divine right of caucusocracy, the title of last week's broadcast, gives itself permission because you're not there to stop it. Bad don't fix itself, folks. I don't know how many times I'm going to be able to say that before anybody really hears it. Okay, so gold and silver money, jump into it, folks. Cannabis has given us the door to get it back in. Sound money. You bring in the reasons why. There's a whole list of states now and their reasons, the bulk of which are very powerful to read anyway. You can compile a short list of the most powerful points, and then you can present in your states that don't, and or fortify the use in the states that are, and be the alternative to the very thing you've been claiming you want to end: the Fed, the fiat, the debasing, the inflation. Is it really so hard, or we just like to watch the performance art and listen to the psychotics give us the information? Maybe I sound psychotic here. I don't know. I really believe that this could happen and could change, and we could live the life we want. Boy, does that sound psychotic? Yeah, but it's actually what we should be doing. So I guess what I get to see in that observation is, being wrong in the eyes of the world or any part of it means only the world has a warped sense of itself. You think? Because when I'm looking at stuff, it looks pretty objective and straight up and kind of creates peace and settlement like it's done objectively. I'm not making this up. I'm just reading the existence of the things that were set up for us that we've abandoned. I sound pretty wrong at some level. I must be wrong because really no one responds to what I'm saying, that it's right. No one responds to the rightness of what I'm saying. So I look like a madman, but it doesn't make me wrong. Now, am I completely right? Well, we don't know that. I wouldn't know that. That's all dependent on how this thing gets executed out and really what the failures were when we started to practice the right stuff. Like I said, let's get back to the law, see what doesn't work there. That's where I'm going to be in error if it was a misinterpretation of the actual application, the rightful, lawful application. I could be wrong in the fringes of that. But boy, I'd rather live underneath that to start with than what we're seeing today. And I take my life and put it into attempting to stop the intrusion, attempting to stop the invader, not making excuses for it, no matter how overwhelming it becomes and has been becoming. I just continue to focus my energy into it as best I can. And it's not sometimes so simple, and it doesn't have an answer, but you still face the terror, and when it comes on you, folks, you're going to defend yourself, or you're going to become a slave to it. Or are you going to pretend it's not there? You're going to call it a boogeyman, like the turnaround of the psychotic one stating that everything is, it looks like the sky is falling. Well, some of that was real, and some of it you can do something about, but he never said that. And then he got lunched and put underneath the boogeyman, and then so that knocks out the whole rest of the society. And no one stood up and said, wait a minute, it's not any of that. It's like this here, not because I say so, but because it's written to be that way, and we were supposed to follow it. It wasn't a rule o' law, it was a law. It wasn't someone's opinion on the law. It was what the law was. Boy, I've told you, when I started to see what equity actions were about relative to property rights, why that was so powerful. You have to, asserting your rights is a knowledge, and it's an application and protection and defense, because the world is out there to come and take you out. However peaceful I would rather see it, that would be psychotic to believe that the world is peaceful. We see it all the time. Now, so behind the Woodshed, we kind of explained to you the future. I tell you, you find out what the future could hold, even if it's from the past, that we failed to hold, and what will happen in the future, and what you focus your mind on, and what you focus your time on. And this is one of the other themes I noticed that the people like these psychotic ones that are doing performance art, whether they look like MSM or whether they look like the so-called alternative media, folks, we're behind the Woodshed, we're beyond media. Yeah, I transmit and broadcast on a medium. Oh yes, I'm in witchcraft, I suppose, too, right? No, there's a medium that goes out. It's a broadcast through this, but I'm not media. I refer to these news articles as the notice to us. It's a legal condition. They're required to do that. Even international invasions are required to do that. So this is so when I look at the news this way, I know it's a legal notice. It's the beginning of due process. You all want to believe about, what due process, you demand your due process? This is it. This is where it starts. And you don't respond. Notice opportunity to respond, the time to respond, and a place to respond. That's all your due process boils down to. So when you when some occupier gives you a notice that they're there and they're invading you, and it gives you the opportunity to respond and you don't, they take the license as they can in the world to take your acceptance of it. Your silence is their victory at that point. Really simple principle that everyone wants to argue over. Would rather go look at that government means mind control and don't realize that was mind control. That very statement and the belief in it is mind controlled. That was an ED. Past tense. Oh, wow, there's grammar to worry about. Oh, yeah. MENT is a suffix, isn't it? Oh, it has to have a prefix in order to work on it. Oh, okay, we got a different analysis going. Oh, it was the Latin. Well, the Latin died a few centuries ago. So let's put this all in context. And we're going to come up with a little different thing that doesn't make and create excuses. And I always look at some of these things, it's the two-edged sword. If you say the government's mind-controlled, and you accept that by that definition of what government is, and go through all the so-called Latin proof, you are mind-controlled. You're being mind-controlled by the one who presents that, and you don't turn around and go do the deep study, if that becomes a problem for you, on what that problem is, and that it is the problem if you agree with it. We do not have the capacity, though we were educated to do so, to go check our own work, or check someone else's work. That's why I say, I'll say stuff. You go where I ask you to go. You go look at the first notice and then track it down. And if you need more help, you can send me an email, or most of the time I tell you where to go look. Right in the code, the thing that they're using against you that you'll deny. And going on. So who's another problem? I told you, don't focus too much time on this thing. And I'm going to show you how far ahead I determined this. It's not that I'm coming up with this after the fact, and I'm not going to touch this. I got 3 links. I won't even read them. Just want to tell you it's a condition. I was telling you the future way back when, a couple years ago or so, I guess. I don't even keep track of this stuff. Trump claims vindication in Mueller report goes on attack. Didn't I tell you that, folks, when we first heard about this nonsense? And I said, don't waste time in this thing. You can, I guess, get your popcorn out and watch the show, because it's just a show. It's breads and circuses. I said at the time, and I told it in a very particular way. I'm not reading to you this and saying I'm claiming victory. I'm telling you I advanced this before, but in a particular way. Trump intensified attacks on Mueller report before release. How would he know to do that, or that he could? Trump's latest attacks place him in the company of authoritarian strongman. Now, the interpretation of this. Isn't really that what I said? I said Trump would not have allowed, then, years ago, or whatever, how long it was in the beginning, I said Trump would not have allowed Mueller, who was known to be against him, to be looking and digging up all he could against him. He would not have allowed him to be in that capacity if Trump had anything really to worry about. I'm not talking about everything to worry about, but anything substantive to Trump in the office and getting there. Trump would not allow that guy into that place if he had something he needed to protect. He would let him in there if he knew he had nothing, and they knew that they were going to try and do a very big dog and pony show, because at the end he could come and vilify every one of them. You remember when I said that? I hope you were around long enough and you did remember it and you did hear me say that. That's how I prepared you for that. I said, don't put any time in this thing. Let's turn our attention to other places. Don't get lost in the dialogue. Don't get lost in the he said, she said. Don't do it to yourself. Go other places. I don't think I really ever looked at any story in that as I saw them coming through the feeds or whatever links or whatever I saw. I commit to what I tell you. I only keep an eye out on whether or not the dog and pony show, I was incorrect in that interpretation, and it wasn't. That never ever happened in this. So I want to remind y'all, folks, years ago, if you're looking to refine your time and spend it on important things and not follow the psychotic ones or the performance artists, be they alternative or be mainstream, I told you that the dynamic of why, and those three stories I just told you, where Trump comes out of the attack before the report, and then gets attacked by people outside, even because now they're still triggered, is the condition I told you was existing, that I was asking you don't spend any time in this. And there's lots of these types of breads and circuses. Okay, the Breads and Circuses Brigade is also alternative media, and it's as well as the mainstream. It's any medium. It's any social platform that continues this. Even this idea of this shadow banning, it's not real. It's damage is happening, but it's done to capture you into the process of that happening. To me, I mean, we look at this as it's self-admitted psychosis, but we now see a societal psychosis cult. I think I've even made this term before. It's not even new. Alex Jim Jones. Out of his mouth, he says it's a psychosis. Out of his mouth, he says it's performance art. I'm suggesting to you, and you already know this, the mainstream is the same way. It's all a fraud for us, where it actually causes us and takes up our time and affects us in a way that negatively influences us. It all becomes fraud then. That's crime. Do we respond to any of that? Not really. What we do is we call that out for ourselves and say, like I've done, although I kind of do other things. It doesn't matter what Alex Jones does or what he calls himself. He's where he is. It just has no value to me whatsoever. Zero value. For as much as I honored him in his escalation of himself from peg access into what you saw as notoriety, I now realize there was probably an inside job on how he was able to do that. You just don't do that on just a little bit of content on an Austin, Texas peg access television station. And I've never had those connections that would allow me to take this content up. And then I also realize there's not many of you listening. There are some of you. Now, I can't tell you how much I do appreciate that. And even though I would like to see more action, I do appreciate that you're there and you're working stuff out. And I certainly appreciate in the chat later when I finally get into it, I kind of look through what the comments are. I don't have a whole lot of time, so you don't see much discussion. I'm doing post-production. I'll be doing this now for till midnight my time, after the broadcast. I appreciate seeing that I've had effect in your lives. It's really that you've been able to take some of the stuff I've said and apply it that helped you. That's good, in a way that's good enough. If I could help one, but I've helped more than one. So I know you're out there, but I'm not talking just about one-on-one. We are talking one-on-one, but I'm saying that there's a bigger need, a much larger need, and we're not going to get to it by listening and engaging ourselves in this thing, the Trump, the Russiagate, the Mueller report. And I just want to remind you all, because it's a dynamic, not that I said it that way. The dynamic is what I called out to show you that was breads and circuses. Don't be part of the breads and circuses brigade. Then turn yourself to something that's important and do something about the things that are important. I won't repeat it. I want to repeat the point. Trump put the guy in office, and now you saw the outcome, and then you see the reports. Because just like I told you, now that he comes out immediately, before he even knew it, he started beating everybody about the heads and shoulders or worse. Perfect setup. At that point, I have to appreciate a bit of Trump. On the other hand, 2 years later, he's now stabbed America in the heart by destroying some of its raw materials production. So, we got this devil and angel thing going on, don't we? The perfect storm for destruction. New bill, and then this guy also agrees with all this perfect storm. I guess Reagan couldn't pull it off. So they're going to go give it to the Israelis, and the Pentagon's going to pull this off. The money's going to go to a known international occupier of foreign lands, and there is billions going to be spent in weapons technology. New bill would see United States taxpayers subsidize experimental Israeli laser weapons. Angel, being able to defend himself and show the Democrats up and the liberal, progressive actually, agenda against him, showed him up, attacked them, and at the same time turning around and giving the devils, the devil's children, money to do laser weaponry that has a horrendous effect on people. If I can call them all animals, they're inhumane weapons. This is going on as well, all at the same time. And they claim that the people are terrorists. No, remember, the original definition, the actual definition of terrorism, not the one changed in legalism through Congress. The actual one is a system of government that rules by terror. Terror means fear, intimidation, and dread. And so the governments are the only actual bodies that can be terrorists, and those commit terrorism. The agents of which inside are the terrorists. And we see this in every action. This notice to us that they're going to give Israelis, not Israelites, Israelis, And the distinction comes out of more of the arguments. The distinction in question is, the problem is they've determined they only speak Hebrew. That's the only thing that goes on here between the pre-48s and post-48s. We're going to give to the Zionist movement advanced weaponry and pay for it. Taxpayers in the United States. And we're beyond that too. So, it's kind of a nonsense statement, but we as a people agreed to this. And because of this performance art that we see in so-called media, we're bought into the sensationalism, and we bought into concepts that are going to destroy other people. As I said, it's a mirror. What we see going on elsewhere comes back on us. What we do, what our spirit or our intention is here against ourselves will reflect against others. So here's the notice. The new bill will see U.S. taxpayers subsidize experimental Israeli laser weapons. Well, when you find out they're tying these things also to AI, this becomes kind of a terrorizing thing, and you find out what they're doing with these weapons. It's just handing to a global occupier the power and offloading something from the United States to be done by an occupier in the world. And I'm going to say that until they show the right to exist in the world peacefully. And they don't. And that's going to tell us something. And where did I get that? It's predicted they won't be. So, I'm pretty set to just sit here and wait. I'm not going to even waste time on that. They're going to be as evil as they're going to be. What are you going to do about it now? You're going to continue to engage the fiat system by not engaging raw materials production wealth to you locally and gold and silver, which the Fed can't touch? I told you it was the alternative, and they can't touch it, remember? See, we're allowing all this nonsense. It's like dominoes. In fact, there was a little thing that came in the chat, the Real Liberty Media chat during the trivia. The little dot, the little trivia thing about the dot on the dominoes was the pips, and I think it was Kayate that said those pips are modern. The modern pip is the stock market indicate digits or whatever. That immediately triggered in my mind. Well, I wonder if there's algorithms written with those modern pips, and they're really playing a game of dominoes with the stock market. And if you understood that part, where the placement and the numbers were with the numbers, you see how it may be a model for how they're actually manipulating things. I don't know. But it sounds interesting how these things get modified through so-called modernism into problems into the world today, and it's underneath, it's transparent to us. And yet we allow it. And I find it interesting how the chat the subject matter comes up, kind of a synchronistic kind of issue, where I wasn't even thinking in that direction. Terror financing and the Security Council, folks. I think we're looking at the first new story here. Terrorism, the Terror Financing and Security Council. UN Security Council voted to impose sanctions on countries which finance terror groups. The issue of terror financing has been partially addressed before, but Thursday resolution is the first comprehensive measure of its kind. The UN Security Council, folks, listen to this. The UN Security Council, this is all the nations agreeing. That means Trump agreed with this. That means the United States agrees with this. And I'm going to read between the lines on something for you a bit. Again, we're going to see a bit into the future, I suppose. I could be wrong, but I'd rather work on the fact that I may be seeing the wrong in the future than to negate it and ignore it. The UN Security Council voted to impose sanctions on countries which finance terror groups. The issue of terror financing has been partially addressed before, but Thursday's resolution, the first comprehensive measure of its kind. The Security Council unanimously passed a French resolution making terrorism financing a serious crime. The binding resolution drafted under Chapter 7, again, the UN documentation here, right? You got to get this, folks. This is a problem that we've been watching come on. The Chapter 7 of the UN Charter can be backed with sanctions for countries that do not comply. Does that sound like it's too far away from you, folks? Do you think that's not already in effect in the United States? Can I ask whether or not you remember Section 326 of the Patriot Act that criminalized everybody, that presumed every transaction as being money laundering to support terrorism? That this bill, this country universally agreed to Security Council power requires that the governments that are involved in binding upon them create units, financial units, in order to address that. When you look at this term financial units, what they're creating, I realize that it pertains to the investigators that would be doing investigative units. It would be the unit, the mechanical unit, the technological unit that gathers the information that does the reporting. And it could be the unit of measure for how they calculate the value that's being, or purportedly being, used to fund terrorism. Each one of those, the investigators, the investigative unit, the phone, the unit of the information gathering, and the blockchain unit that they use, would be put in force underneath this convention in order to purportedly or ostensibly fight financing terrorism. By the Patriot Act, brings everyone into this problem by this resolution. Then, I don't know, did I say that clearly enough, folks? When you see the report taking and report in real-time reporting requirement, and we look at the word financial investigative unit, and they say it's even taking the information, and it's how they measure the information, and it could be those that are looking in as investigators. The term financial unit of it for investigation purposes is your iPhone, is your, like a MOBA phone, as I think I put it in a Twitter. MOBA phone. It couldn't have been an iPhone because it's not just Apple's. MOBA phone. This resolution, I think, is much more serious than it looks like on its surface. It seems too distant as well. I think this is the first notice of your, if I could say cashless society, it's certainly going to be your first notice of your global social identity. And it's all scrutinized under the presumption, if you will, the Patriot Act already. You already heard they've already done stuff. They don't tell you what that is. And your whole life is being presumed to be as an enemy combatant in the war of terror against you. And you keep agreeing. Is, I think here, I know maybe it's a little bit of a jump, but maybe for a lot of people. But when I read some of the words here, I said, wow, this is the first notice. This is the first notice that they're making this global. And I already know Patriot Act says you are a terrorist and that you are presumed to be doing violations. Why you all, and why you will have to, as long as this is existence, have to go identify yourself. Remember, that's already the first record that's involved. That this UN security, you understand the security, this is police powers of the nations coming together to say this is a thing. And it has to do with our security. And they now put all this underneath the police power in the globe and hand it to a foreign entity to watch and monitor. Remember those Interpol? The right of Interpol to come and whisk you away in rendition? Remember that act long years ago? Yeah. I think you're watching all this come together. They do it so slow. But in any regard, I think you better take this a lot more serious. Again, you may not do nothing about it. I don't know. You may not do anything, I should say it more properly. Anything about it, I don't know. But I'll just say it. This is just what I said. I think this is your first plan. The global cashless or global surveillance system has now been legalized globally. And I think they already tie into something that happened back in the United States of America. And I think it's why you've been seeing everything come down. There's a well, I don't know what to say. I just kind of get lost in my thoughts and not really good articulation of the point, I think, at this point. This is actually very concerning to me that, again, transparent to y'all, they've done you again, and we won't know this until for a little while. At any rate, as I've told you, the sustainable development thing that you all didn't understand in Agenda 21 that lots of people, laughed at and thought was sensationalism was made sensational instead of, I don't think you ever heard Alex Jones, the psychotic, telling you where you could find that in the law to prove that it existed. I don't think I ever heard him ever tell you in the House Delegates Resolution of the Bar Association they already knew about the fraud that they were committing between Europe and between the United States. I've read that all behind the woodshed. I don't think he's ever done a lawsuit when he saw the information that attacked as best he could that very system for being the treason that it is. I've told you that we did in 2013, Jefferson Mining District, and I'm one of the parties because of the way the court case was made. We had to have flesh and blood in the game, not just a legal entity. Why? Because we're talking about real land and real people that the Congress granted property to, not entities. That's why I can tell you there's a distinction before 1871 and the one after that everyone wants to focus on. In fact, we used the 1871 to destroy the authority that was trying to take away the case. The point is that I don't think you hear the psychotics and the performance artists in the world doing any of this stuff. And then the other thing I have to caution you as I say that, because it's happening all the time too, is people who might have things that they're doing. Be careful they're not set up cases to create a bad precedent. See, we got attorneys that do that all the time. And so we're in a very bad way when you start looking at this on being outpositioned and outplaced and all this other stuff. But to me, it's a matter of having more people know the truth and bring it forward, not sensationalize it, not know it and then go away. So, the government's the biggest terrorist. That's why I said that's the war of terror against you. And all these things are in the way. And I told you that I'm sure that Alex Jones never told you that all the infrastructure, what they called the capacity build and infrastructure, was already in your counties to impose this international stuff way back in the 80s, as best as I can see it. And we researched back a bit, and we found that it kind of breaks off around the 80s. And right before that, there was institutions made in the States to start that process. So it actually starts in the middle 70s, but we don't see the effect actually implemented and how it implements until the 80s. It took a little bit of run up to get the organizational stuff, to get the counties set up to destroy you. And so you leave those like that, you have crickets on all that, and they have the ability to destroy you. But you walk in and you find out how it was wrong, that it violated laws or obligations and duties under these de jure establishment, and you point that out and you work against it. Now you're putting teeth back into what you do. And it's the subtlety that I tell you about that needs to be understood before you will understand what I'm saying. And a lot of times I'll just say, and stop making excuses and fighting what I'm saying and jump in with something, and you'll see what I'm saying. Until you do that, then you think that your opinions, your definition of government, it rules the day. It is the only thing in the world. To me, it's all nonsense in that regard, but I don't know what to do. I can only push a wet noodle so far before I just realize it's futile and I got to move somewhere else and stop pushing the noodle. So another form of terrorism of the government on us, moving in through the terrorist, is the government. By definition, folks. You want to start talking about definitions and the accuracy of it, go read those. Don't read the ones that are legalized. If you haven't caught it, I'll say it one more time. The legalized versions can be brought back to lawful, but you have to do it, where that legalized version violates your rights. You'll see that provision, it's called the savings clause, in every body of statutes. Why? Because the occupier has to recognize all prior law that it could not change. And then it can only change those laws over time that it could. This is just international provisions of law, and it's done this way so that we have, even in the international specter, there's some version of objective basis so that we can find out that what we see in Venezuela, how Trump is doing it, a violation in Venezuela. Otherwise, if we didn't have that objective basis, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have seen the 2010 murder memo that I identified for you finally when we got all the proof out in 2012 that showed that the United States government was abandoning law, international law, its judicial system, essentially the establishment of itself, and was going to go on executive expedience. How it executively exists after it destroys the system, I don't know, and why y'all were crickets to that point, why I opened with crickets generally pretty right up to the first few seconds of the broadcast, is this problem. See, they declared war on the world at that point. And now they're giving money to the most heinous group of people who can't prove their right to be where they are and are given support by only the people who are paying them. They're just another agent of destruction. another agent of destruction in this war of terror on you. In another way, another facet of the attack, another report from John Rappaport, manufacturing live vaccine, virus vaccines need live human tissue in order to grow viruses, hence, quote, waterbag abortions. The side effects of children receiving vaccines with broken DNA fragments of aborted babies will blow you away. A link to a Twitter feed, to a link to a video, astonishing, folks, but here's why I'm talking about it, not sensationalism. I've told you all about this before as well. Where did we hear about the broken DNA fragments? Absolutely recorded, if it's not from what I was saying, but lethal injection from Clint Richardson. You need to see this link. I put it in the chat last night when I was in RLM chat. You need to see what the people are saying here, not sensationalism. This is what's a cause and effect of what's going on. I told you that this law in New York about abortions that are going on just seconds before birth, and now I'm even actually hearing it's happening right after birth. Oh, interesting. Was done for the live tissue. Well, now we know that they have a term for it, actually. It's waterbagging. Not waterboarding, waterbagging, because they need the live young tissue. I told you that this was a thing, folks. It's a whole industry. It's what Roe versus Wade starts. It's how the government was going to make an objective basis of when it could take the fetal tissue from the mother without jeopardizing the mom. And I said over the decades of time, they've been able to make that time even up until seconds before, that it doesn't threaten the production unit of the human female. And they can take these parts, these tissues, without harming the productive female. And that tissue, that fetus, is more valuable as parts than it is as a well, they would turn it into an illegal entity, human animal being, instead of the man or woman it'll grow up to be. So they have to take the stuff live, folks. They do it called waterbagging. They're not really abortions at that point, are they? But this is the double speak. You need to really see this video. You need to see what's going on. There's other in the links to this Twitter. They talk about more people who have brought more facts, again, not sensationalism, about the condition of this thing that was brought onto us in Roe versus Wade, that was the fetal industrial complex. Fetal medical industrial, fetal pharma industrial complex. This is all about money. This is about parasitically feeding from you. Oh, they hide it underneath and couch it by, women's right to do this and that. There might be some of that, but that's not what they did that for. And so here's another evidence of what I told you, why the New York law needed to get tissues. They need to get small brains that are functioning, because they're going to use them in these experiments coming on, and for whatever. I mean, it's on and on. And in this list of documents, there's the guy who was involved with the fetal tissue line vaccine construction, the doctor, the preeminent doctor, who admits that they take many fetuses, and these things are not perpetual, so they take more fetuses to get these injections. And just as Clint Richardson identified before, I don't think anybody was talking about this stuff, that he identified through his source research. The stuff I told to him right before he produced that lethal injection, I said, you need to put in why they get to do this. And that was Title 7 and Title 50 and what he reads later in the documentation, where it's real dry, but it tells you the government gave this license to do this stuff to you. Title 50, folks. So you don't think you live in a military consequence of necessity? Go read Title 50. It's all here to read, and why you all are crickets, I don't know. Why you go off on your psychotic sensationalism, I don't know. I start even thinking. I say that I don't even know what more to say, because if you don't understand that about what you're doing to you yourself and yours around you, you don't understand me. I don't know what you're listening actually to, but get back to the point. It just kind of drives me nuts a little bit to think about this stuff. We're really being hurt and harmed in real evil ways, and it's not easy to look at. In fact, I don't like looking at any of this, but it's a necessitous thing to do. And I can't be everywhere. I can just focus on things and hope I throw interjections of observations in. Clint Richardson lethal injection give you the source document for why. He gives you the diploid problem. He said, these videos show you this is not a joke. I don't care what the government says. That's a cover for violating you. There's DNA mutations. The most interesting thing I heard, and it made a lot of sense, was the statement was made that these the small size of the DNA fragments are not complete DNA. They interact and mutate other DNA in the one they inject. And they are finding, and there's reports of gender identification confusion in people that get these injections, these vaccines. Well, I looked at that. I'd never heard that one before. So you see, you learn little things here and there, even new. But does it now make any question why we have gender identification so-called issues? Those are fabricated and promoted, but does it now make a question why that's even a thing? Because it is a thing? It's a genetic mutation because of the vaccines they've been using. And what you're looking at now is this. In fact, there's Transgender Day going on. This is not transgender in my view now from this. This transgender gender identity triggering or whatever it is actually evidence of vaccine harm, folks. Do people look at it that way? No, they look at the sensationalized side. They look at the trick. They look at my hands over here, while over on the other side of the screen they're not showing you they're doing something else. Focus on the transgender, but don't go look at the cause. I'm not insensitive to that thing. I think I call it zits. That doesn't make me insensitive. It has to do with the political use of that. But when you hear that there's an actual causation of a change in genetic disposition which causes a change in perception, that's never been admitted to by the government, we have a serious problem. When I said your kids are being epigenetically changed, I wasn't joking, folks. Here's maybe the first proof, at least, that came kind of out of left field for me. Well, I don't really focus on this. So, gender identity is questions, confusion is caused by these injections, it appears. Makes all the sense in the world why it becomes a thing in the world today. And a place is being made for that you focus on the political aspect, but don't go look at the cause, which was the pharmaceuticals that they're injecting into all these abused people. None of which went to the vaccine court to get compensated for. Wouldn't that be a trip to get out? Is this news to you, folks? Did any of you know this? I'd never heard this issue. Again, some of the stuff I think about, I'm stunned. I don't know what to say. Wow. This government is all over the world, folks, are changing people. And they don't have an empathy one about that. I'm actually, saddened for people that have. This is, we're talking about, you can't, what do you do against someone that really can't help it? It's not unreal, but it's been it's synthesized. Deal with that problem. But see, here's the thing that's interesting. We do deal with, that's what alternative dispute resolution is. They're fabricating these synthesized gender identity. We can stop it if we go focus on it, can't we? Will you, is the question. Will you? And my frustration. Now look at, again, the microcosm and the minor. A news story came to me here just a couple days ago focusing on something. 2 supposed mining districts that are not. They're actually tax-exempt organizations. That's not a mining district. They now follow with another adulteration and another destruction in another group. That, as I was identifying in their logo, folks, you want to talk about looking at cryptic iconics. Just their logo, there's 3 strikes against them just in the logo relative to actual law. There's a couple more strikes if you go a little bit deeper on the implications of it. And so we're playing a baseball game where there's 5 strikes and they're still not out because people buy into it. The microcosm of the mind are being duped, not wanting to do the research, wanting to call people like me a charlatan without going and doing the most basic study, let alone the comprehensive application of that study. Is the macrocosm we call the society, what do we call this? Societal psychosis cult, we call it society in the United States of America, and I would say elsewhere. Transgender identity, finding out that it's an epigenetic causation of vaccines, and then they're making room for this? Think about how they're making room for this in legal. Should terrify you, actually, as I more think about that. And then what happens? In the same week we get this information, unvaccinated children face public space ban in New York's measles case. There's so much wrong about this that I don't even know what do I talk about. If you understand this problem, I don't need to tell you about it. If you don't understand this problem, you need to do some research before I can tell you about it. We always have the problem of like they're not telling you that your little ones are being gender identity confused by vaccines and other things. Cancer, folks, you get childhood leukemia goes way up with vaccines. And there's now more and more studies, not opinion. So I would refer you over to the studies, not my opinion even here to say so. But we are getting indication this is way, way serious. And you see society developing. The legalistic society is already ahead of it, making room for it. Which means they plan for it to be a thing forever. They don't plan for you to step up and stop any of this. And we can see that indication. Remember I told you, watch out New York. New York is going to be the focal point of how things are going to come down and what they're telling us in the future is going on. Relative to the now Waterbag births that are actually called abortions. Why? Because they want the fetal tissue. They talk about in the vaccines that you want the DNA from all tissue. I was telling you that they want the brains too. They want the nervous system. They want to tie these things into other systems, and technocrats want to do this. Okay, but unvaccinated children face public space ban. Well, when you look at the vaccines, they're the ones doing the shedding. First thing I want to know, why would you want to do that? For two reasons. How do we know the vaccines haven't caused the problem? Like we found the 30 kids over there in California, closed circuit, 30 kids in the system, got vaccinated, got the measles. How do we account for the young ones that had the measles, that are under 18, that aren't going to ever get them again because they got them naturally? See, this is just a blanket stage that they use police power to do this with. And if you're not paying attention to the way they're doing this, you're missing a lot of the trick. And part of recognizing the trick is being able to recognize how to undo this and stop this tyranny. It's coming on you, folks. They made a room for transgender gender identity confusion. That's shocking in a way to me, even so. Looking at all this and knowing that they plan ahead, this is pretty phenomenal what they do. These people actually thinking about this and forcing it. You can't go out unless you get vaccinated. So if you have a job and you're under 18, like I was, you're not going to go to work underneath this unless you're sharp enough to go fight it. Are you going to fight it? No, you're not going to fight it. You're too young. You're just going to go do your thing, right? Are the so-called parents, the custodians of the ward of the state called the child, going to step up? No, they're too ignorant too. They don't get behind a woodshed, understand what they need to know to go out and live a future that they were intended to live. No, they live the one that's mind-controlled. So you fill in, you think that government means mind control? That's what you're watching, because people believe they're mind-controlled. They're not really critically thinking at all, then they're not critically acting. You see, that's the extension. You just can't think. You're just mind-controlled if you just think. Oh, I know I am because I know. What? No. There's somebody attacking you. Are you going to stand? You going to take it or not? Unvaccinated children banned from public places. In the second story, I bring this one up and as a link for you to read. There's two different types of stories. One is telling you a little bit more of the facts behind it, which when you read it actually are facts that show that vaccines are not effective and or could be causing the problem. As I said before, you're not hearing that side. And then I have a funny, as I read through the second one just quickly here, 153 confirmed cases were not vaccinated. But there was only 82% of all of the cases, which means, 18% or so that were vaccinated? Wow, that's pretty interesting. So they're going to force you to get vaccinations? They're going to force you into this condition where you might have your kids genetically confused for their gender and possible leukemia? This is the trade-off they're giving you? Yes, this is the trade-off they're giving you. But anyway, the second story I have a link. It shows you some numbers. If you're a numbers kind of mind, they'll tell you, and you look very carefully. This is the vaccines are no good. The vaccines aren't what they say they are. 153 confirmed cases. Did you trip over that one a little bit, folks? I did. In the whole eastern seaboard, 153 cases is worth what's going on to shut down people from moving freely about the country? Are you kidding me? But then when you find out where it came from someone that went to Israel and came back to their burrow and started to cause the problem? No, there's a whole other story going on by this. But when I looked at some of how the harms are working and see the Title 50, I realized this is a plan to harm you. And maybe this is a good thing that they're doing. Keep your kids away from everybody right now. Use that as a license. Maybe even do something over there in New York. Charge them for being the one that is being imposed by the system because of these failures, these other failures, and call it a takings on your right to travel. Will you win? Maybe not, but who cares? You get the point out, don't you? You get to be the one teacher that said, stop shooting me with these BBs and breaking my skin and making me bleed over a drill to adversely abuse me so I might work to risk my life at the next guy that comes in underneath one of your drills and shoots me dead just to make a new martyr out of everything. One teacher, folks. Remember that story? If you weren't here to hear that, you got to tune in and stay tuned in to Behind Woodshed. We'll tell you how this all works and how all the examples and about everywhere show you the same story. We're in trouble, and it's going to take you standing up and not complaining in the right way in order to stop it. So the terrorism that comes on us allows the agencies allow the risk-benefit thing is always there. It's risk management, folks. I keep telling you about this. It has nothing to do with reality. It's what can they get away with it? What's my example of that so everyone can understand? Oh, the clean water. Oh, is it an act of clean water? No. Everyone thinks it is because it says so in the title. That's the end of our acknowledgement and our critical thought. No, if you look at the act and go read it, it's an act to pollute water just a little bit. And so the government impliedly agrees to polluting your life just a little bit. Now, there's a reality behind that. But the point is that you come in with the wrong mind, you don't understand what they're doing. It's like using NEPA, the environmentalists have drug the National Environmental Policy Act out and beat everybody senseless, and they don't realize that that's not, the environmentalist position is not the balance that's supposed to be struck. Or that to identify because that's the balance that was taken by the courts, that they're corrupt in that as well. And because of these decisions and precedents, your life is going down the tubes. And they get to pollute more and pollute more and pollute more until what, folks? Till someone finally stands up and says, I'm not going to take this anymore. Or I'm so sick I can't function no more, and I think I can prove it. Man awarded $80 million in lawsuit claiming MonSatan's Roundup, now Slayer, causes cancer. Well, if the vaccines weren't good enough, the FDA allowed all these things, and human diploid cells of fetal tissues attaching to your little one's DNA and now causes gender confusion, health ailments. We don't even know about autism. We don't know about carriers for aluminum or any other particle adjuvant that's in there that goes to the brain and causes new things, as I told you. We found out finally, again, the scientists finally figured out reality. There's some magnetite particles that may give us a magnetic orientation. I said, well, you can do that with an influx of a non-ferrous material that's then inducing a current, right? And this new 5G and any other Wi-Fi you do, that might start new signaling in your brain. You don't think they understand about this stuff? I have to say that they do, because I've read reports on how they know about these neuron connections and what they do to trigger chemical recombinations. I told you this stuff is epigenetic. It happens real time. What did I find out? I found out in front of you a couple years ago. Wasn't even a thought in my mind they could actually change you in real time. I thought DNA was DNA. What the heck? It just sits there and it acts to replicate itself every 21 days, whatever it is, we found out. No, they can interfere with that. It wasn't just in the negative. They can actually interfere to recombine things. And they don't know what the recombinations actually do anyway. But man awarded $80 million from MonSatan. The Roundup causes cancer. Second case, a jury has ordered damages. I want to point out that damages is a harm to you, not equity, which is the punitive imposition against to try to cause someone to forego and not do again in the future what they've done to your rights and property, different and distinct than harm to it. You have to understand that, because it's how you would then address your paperwork and your record. And someone came up with I think it was I can't remember now where it was. What is this ring I call a record? And a nice little simple thing that I think people might understand. When I say make a record, what's a simpler way to understand it? But it's your paper trail. It's your paper trail through your rights. How you establish that in paper. It's not this anomalous thing. It's a literal trail of evidence that you create by the facts or to identify someone's coming against you incorrectly, and you had gave them the notice in the first letter to say, you're not coming with the proper authority to do this. That's a paper trail. A paper trail of evidence would be like the chain of evidence, okay? So for those of you that don't quite get what I'm saying when I say we make a record, it's a paper trail, tying a crime to the one who's doing it. And again, it's done in all solemn and seriousness. You don't ever allege against someone who isn't. That's not, you don't become a false witness in any of this. When someone comes against you, you can't hesitate to defend yourself. That's even in a criminal case, as I've told you. And they're not, well, they're quasi-criminal, I suppose. Like especially the simple ones for people to understand, like traffic cases. You don't take it as a criminal, as someone who has to do a criminal side. You have to attack it as a collateral attack in equity, if you can show that they didn't have the right to impose the commercial statutes of the state or feds against you. You make a paper trail of that improper imposition. That's all a record is. And I reduce those down into they're more focused formal reports. Right. So, if we don't make them, we don't have evidence to go anywhere. And even that doesn't have to go to court. We can do it administratively. We can do it in one-to-one interactions before we have to get involved at all. If we don't have that in us, at the moment it hits us, they have the deference, the power. We're already 2 steps behind anyway. If you don't correct the 3 steps it takes to get past them shoulder to shoulder, they will win every time. And that's what you're suffering and why you think there's no law. It's because you're ignorant of the law. You don't understand that there's a dynamic they've set us up in. That I'm not talking out of my head. I'm actually thinking about how I've done processes here, and especially just recently, where it starts to become more apparent. I'm trying to figure out, what am I doing here? I'm not really telling people that they may not know. We're 3 steps behind. We're actually 2 steps, and we have to be 1 step ahead. If we don't make those 3 steps up in the initial contact, when it goes anywhere, and if it goes anywhere, if we're standing shoulder to shoulder in an factual manner with the authority, it will win because the government gives it deference. If it's an administration, it gives it sovereignty, superiority, if it's in the capacity of a judicial side. If you don't understand this dynamic, you will always lose. A collateral attack not only perfects the 3 steps, but it also now comes back literally as an attack on their right. And that Shasta requires them now to answer. And if you've done it right, you've not done it as an opinion or a question, an issue to be decided by the judge. It now is a matter of law decision that the record, your paper trail, proves. Proves, folks. You don't walk in with these questions. And I don't know whether I ever communicate that as well as I need to a lot of you. I'm not ever talking questions when we finally decide, when we finally look at anything and move forward. We're building every moment. We're building the fact of the fact, and there's no question. That is the most subtle thing I've noticed people miss at every turn. I wish y'all didn't. I wish the guys that even don't know, that call me, what are the names they call me, or disregard, whatever it is. I really don't care. I should maybe listen, and maybe I should care. Maybe I need to go fight them everywhere about how they disregard what I'm saying. It's only harming them, but the problem is if it harms everybody in the same way, that ends up harming me. So we're in this ship of state. We're in this boat. And whether or not we move forward and how we move forward is, again, it keeps coming back. It's the same definition of keeping a republic, if you will, for as trite as that might sound to some of you, for as colloquial as it might sound, for as inferior as that finds, so as whatever it sounds to you. We had something to keep. And you always had something to keep, whether or not we were told. We somehow have lost that. And I don't know what more to do than come here every week to give you subject matters to think about and maybe roll up your sleeves and start engaging. And I know your education process, talk about steep learning curves. You're going to be in an escalator, actually, when you start doing that way. Yeah, it's a steep learning curve, but your experience then now becomes 100% in focus, and you will not miss a step if you make it important. And when you listen to what I'm saying and how you make your paper trail, you've won. In fact, I was talking again to a miner here. He had the right answer. He knew the right answer. I'd say he didn't know he had the right answer. The very first words out of his mouth were about a number that was on the page. And he said, that doesn't pertain to what I do. That pertains to aggregate. I go, you got the secret. You just found the trick. What's the problem? It's that fast, folks. And anyway, so the formality is we had 4 more points to cover. And then there's things you can incorporate. When you learn those, they're not that hard to learn. You flip this whole thing on over, at least for yourself. And I would hope enough of us doing this make an example for others. I don't know what else to say, folks. I mean, it's really not that. It's not. Yes, it's nonsense at some level, but it's where we are. And I guess at some point, do you take the beatings that you're getting behind someone else's woodshed, or do you bring them behind yours? I guess is maybe the only distinction. And I don't know about you if you don't bring them behind yours. Yours has to take a little bit of learning yet. And if I think I saw it go through and I didn't respond, I mean, Gary L., I think, said we're not used to this stuff. Yeah, it's unrecognizable to us. We're out of practice even. I mean, whatever it is, we're not doing what we have to do. I may not have all the answers. I may not have the exact answer for your particular situation, but I don't think so. I think I've got a good first step, if nothing else. I've said it about the Pathfinder, folks. You can tell me what you're doing, and I can tell you where you've been in generalities, and I can tell you what to make. Did you look for this, and did you see that? And when you come back and you tell me that you did, then I know you were there. If you can't, then I know you weren't. It's pretty simple. The guy that comes and tells me that number, he doesn't recognize it because it doesn't apply to the things he's doing. That's the perfect first step. I was able to easily build into that. That's the first thing out of the gate you say. You shut down their whole notice, don't you? You're talking about something that doesn't pertain to me. This notice isn't complete to me. I can't respond to it. You have to respond to it, but you say you can't respond fully to it. Now you've shown that their notices are no good. And the first, what did I tell you due process is? You kill due process when you say their notice, and you prove it, their notice is not sufficient to affect you because it had no authority. Don't you kill the notice, the due process that they were supposed to give you? You prove there is no due process, don't you? It's done right there, folks, if I can say it that quickly. Normally, in practice, we do a little bit more. I have no qualms now to move it past into mail fraud, but that's up to us, right? I told the guy the other day, I said, it's up to you how much you want to build into the letters. They're literally mail fraud anyway, but I mean, do you want to move into there? Do you want to learn the few words that make the point? A material omission, we got to the point. Why didn't they add the 5 numbers or 2 numbers and 3 letters ahead of the number that they were showing to show exactly what the rule was that they were doing? That's a material omission. Folks, material omission means fraud. In a letter communicated through the post office, that's mail fraud. Do you see how fast that is? Are you understanding how quickly that you get to the crime and the law? Will it have force and effect becomes another question, though, but at least you've made your paper trail of their oppression and trespass and breach and of their obligations and duties. Didn't give you due process, which, as I told you, may be the only thing we have left at this point. If I can kill due process, I kill their whole process at all. How do you think we defeat alternative dispute resolution? What do you call, the comment period? What you call the Hegelian dialectic? We say that whole process isn't due process. And what do we do? Especially when we can point out a savings clause in a rule they were supposed to follow. Yes, I will go to their statutes to point out that they failed their own statutes. Why? Because in this case, I'm killing due process. Due process killed in a process that requirement by the government or any partner or stakeholder or anybody else is enough to stop what they're doing. Do any of you understand the most basic points of what I just said and engage those points to do more than complain? Some of you do. Sorry, Vince. I must have said easily. I didn't use an I guess. Anyway. Thank you for listening that closely. Let's see if we can get a whole lot more into applying what we can hear easily. How's that? So, here we have the terrorists in the government allowing themselves license to pollute you so much. We now find out they're willing to pollute you so much and it causes cancer. MonSatan is Slayer's MonSatan is now the punching bag for this. J&J, the talc powder, they're on the hook of this that one as well. Why? Because they didn't give notice that they could have bleeding from everywhere if you use the product. That's the only reason. It's because they didn't give notice of how bad you could be hurt by it. At any rate, I mean, I go read through again. I tell you the story by the title. I touch a little bit of it, but if you read these reports, you'll find astonishing things on the principles that they're using, on how how short they fall. We all think, oh, it's a win against MonSatan. Great, MonSatan takes it. No, go look on how they lost, and you'll find out all it is to you is a notice that they caused you harm. And they disregarded that. That's all it was. It wasn't because MonSatan's Roundup is bad for you. No, they're admitting it's bad for you. It's just that they didn't tell you. Like I said, the Clean Water Act. What's the penalty? You don't tell them you have a spill, and they penalize you until you're destroyed. If you do the spill, and then you tell them within the 48 hours underneath the Clean Water Act, and you do the pollution, and you tell them, okay, we just need to know about it. Bayer, Slayer, and J&J settles in Xarelto litigation. Excuse me. So the MonSatan cancer wasn't what I said. I'm sorry, I looked at it and I was telling the story about it. The MonSatan was the cancer. The Bayer and J&J was where they simply didn't put the fact that you'd bleed out of every orifice of your body on the label or whatever. The point was that the lack of notice and the use is what made them liable. And what they did is they settled $775 million worth in 25,000 litigations. 25,000 people said you harmed me. It was so large that they decided to wrap this up in a big comprehensive bill that they pay the payout to two of these companies, Bayer and J&J, is $775 million. When you read the article, you find out how much money they actually make. In 1 year, they make over $3.6 billion. They've been making it for years as these 25,000 cases come on. Each party to the case in the suit, if my calculation was at 750 and 25,000, it's about 3 times. So, add a zero. What do we got? 30,000, something like $1,000 to each party that's sued is now wrapped up in a consolidated case. That was valuable to them to do, to wrap it up. They took no harm. So now if you think, oh, MonSatan and Slayer or J&J have agreed that they're causing harm, no, this case says that they will not accept harm, that they did any harm. But they're going to settle because it's going to cost them that much anyway if they do 25,000 cases in court, at least $31,000. Right? So they just settle out. And this is what so, again, it's mitigating the risk, isn't it? It's cost, profit, benefit, and the courts are okay with that. The system is okay with that. And somehow, that may be all we have at this point. Again, at those levels, I don't know what makes this place better. I guess something's better than nothing. Maybe we should work on the front end of that so that these things don't go through so quick. I've been told you couldn't, if you tried to invent an aspirin right now, you couldn't get it through. Well, I guess unless you're like a MonSatan or Bayer, Slayer, J&J, and got all the round, the rotating door, you got advantage of the rotating door. I don't know. But I've heard that it'd be very difficult to get even an aspirin through. And aren't we lucky for that? Well, they'd be outlawing our poplar trees, wouldn't they? Maker of OxyContin agrees to $270 million settlement in Oklahoma. This is a more insidious problem. The maker of OxyContin and the company's controlling family agreed Tuesday to pay a groundbreaking $270 million to Oklahoma to settle allegations that helped create a nation's deadly opioid crisis with their aggressive marketing of the powerful painkiller. In this first settlement, to come out of the recent coast-to-coast wave of nearly 2,000 lawsuits against PurDIE Pharma that threatened to push the company into bankruptcy and had stained the name of the Sackler family, whose members rank among the world's foremost philanthropists. That wasn't an SSED. It's STS. The crisis facing our state and nation is a clear and present danger, but we're doing something about it. Well, the people who are getting violated by this suit, and it's only $270 million, are not really, some of them are not too happy about it. Again, they just pay out, they consolidate their losses, and they move on. They're making billions behind all this. They're destroying a nation. You think there's a war on drugs? Look at this case. There's no war on drugs. There's only the war on drugs in order to facilitate the pharma war of terror against you, and the government, the CIA and FBI's motivations to bring more illicit drugs in and make your life miserable through the war on drugs. When are we going to work out this nonsense and lunacy? All agreed to by the Republican and Democratic Party, so let's not lose sight of who's actually allowing this and by whom. The Bar Association. Again, in 2013, I don't sensationalize, I don't talk psychotics, I don't take psychotics. It might sound like it a little bit to all the world that doesn't. It's looking the wrong direction. we made a lawsuit, we sued these very parties, and they didn't answer as a default, folks. I don't know what else more to tell you. I don't know what else more to say. We sued on how they do this, and they obviously continue. We're too small a group of people because the mass of people are not standing up around what we've done and moving it forward to say, this is enough, you've agreed. In default, you agreed, you willfully, knowingly harm us, and you intend to do so. And your regulation constraints are not any protection. Do I say the words too fast, folks? If I don't, can you write them down and start putting that in your letter somewhere? Can you do something to stop the harm against you? These people don't care. Former Duke researcher at center of lawsuit lodges 16th retraction. Retraction. Duke University whistleblower researcher pulls back stuff where the data on it used by the agencies and Pharma and all the other progressives and all this other people, even the Republicans, whoever want to, the data was faulty and it was cooked. The books are cooked and they were caught. You think it happens in just a Duke? Oh, this is an embarrassment. Yeah, you think? A whistleblower got money on this because it's probably a quiet tam action. I didn't look that deep. And he exposed this fixing of the cooking of the books. And so he's going to make a reward, which is supposed to be, presumptively, the check and balance. The big check and balance is supposed to keep this crime against us in check. And we find out that it's not. This is someone who could figure it out and is going to get himself some money that's coming back, $200 million. He'll take, I think, 10%. I don't think he prosecuted this underneath the quiet tam action. You send a notice to the government. If in 60 days they don't respond, you have the right to prosecute. You want to talk about a private attorney general? That's when you're the private attorney general, and that's only time you're the private attorney general on laws that allow that, not because you say so. Again, get it straight what we're talking about. So, whistleblower suit, they brought it through. I assume the federal government pushed this one forward. They found out that Duke University cooking the books on what? It said the whole point of this study that was cooking the books is nitric oxide mediates relative airway hyperresponsiveness in lipopolysaccharides in surfactant protein A deficient mice. This was for a drug, folks, that was used to validate it. And it was completely false. Again, you can read. I could read for you. I could tell you bedtime stories. I'm not really here to do that. I don't know if you'd listen to me long enough to make worry, and then you'd probably be asleep and it wouldn't do me any good. I got a lot of hours of post-production to do for somebody's sake. For a former Duke researcher at Center Lawsuit lodges 16th retracted, pulling back 16th. Well, you find out there's another guy involved. I think there's like 43 studies retracted now because of this cooking of the books. Duke is a wake-up call for research compliance. Another story you can read. I pull these reports together, these notices to us. If you're into trying to out these things, or even for yourself, protect yourself against certain drugs that are made, that are mandatorized or prescribed that are harmful, that you want to go a different way, like the opioids. Maybe you have a choice you want to go to cannabis, for those of you that have that. This is how you start doing that for your paper trail. You take these leads and you go find, even in your thing, if it's not has to do with this drug or another thing or this study, you find how this works against you, and you ferret out. You get out in there and dig out how they're violating you. You make your paper trail, and then you present it in your defense or as a collateral attack against mandatory. I'm kind of working on that side a little bit. All this mandatory this and mandatory that. In New York, if they want to keep the people out of the public areas, maybe it's a good idea, folks. Get them out of the public schools. Stop interacting with the herd. The herd's going to kill you. The response to the herd they want you to do is going to give you a gender confusion. If you're a Generation Z listening to me, they want to impose gender confusion on you. They want to give you the chance of getting some leukemia and other things. Go read the product data sheet if I forgot to say it. That's where you start seeing it. And if you don't see gender identity confusion in there, maybe you got another complaint about the notice isn't sufficient. Those of you that have gender identity problems, you think you have a problem there, and it might be real, but it's really a fabrication of the filter of perception being interfered with by a vaccine, maybe you need some digging to do, and you need to make a point about that. You're harmed. What have I said about gay? My interpretation of being gay after talking with a guy I worked with for a long time, and it occurred to me that people that are gay are abused. Now I was thinking in physical form, and I still hold a lot to that. In fact, I don't have any example that doesn't kind of prove out eventually that that's what's going on. This is a biological abuse. And my intuition and interpretation years and years ago about this thing was, it's can't be changed at this point. There's an abuse going on. Those of you who have gender identity, go look into the probability, it looks like by that one video with the link I'm going to send, that you are the evidence of the harm of a vaccine or some other thing like this dynamic that's built in. I mean, I'm shocked here. I feel for y'all. I don't know what to say now more. You're going to have to step up for yourself. You got to prove this out for yourself. I'm not saying it's happening. I didn't prove it out enough. We have 2 authorities now that show me I better go look into that. And man, doesn't that make sense? Why it's a thing at all? It was never a thing in my upbringing. And now we have to walk like eggshells around all this. But make 2 bathrooms. And what this is a government that allows genetic manipulation into you that filters your perception. Wow. Well, I'm saddened. Just don't know what more to do for you. I really don't know what to do. I hug you? What? What are we going to do? Cry in our milk now? No. We got to stand up and become that evidence. And no, this has got to stop because other people are coming behind it. Duke, wake-up call? No, now because they're caught, the 1 out of 1,000, I told you, the university system is one big fraud going on in front of everybody, folks. That's what we sued. That system that brings it into your life, the system that brings the Bar Association brings in through what appears to be advice that's legal counsel, not law, but legal counsel, and get your local politicians who are officers that have a duty to you to make wrong decisions. This is the same infiltration. It's the same cancerous, metastasizing condition that's been going on since at least the 80s. And I looked up quick and see Gary L., another contributor to soft genocide. If they put you in gender confusion and you don't want to have kids, as one aspect, yes. So you see how they do that, folks? And it doesn't matter who you are. They don't care. It's about, remember, Bill Gates saying, we got too many carbon polluters. We're going to have to get rid of some of them. It's called the population. It's called the population. It's you, folks. Don't you see it? Don't you see this is what they're doing to us? Research institutes can avoid tighter federal reins on grants with better oversight and culture of compliance. A culture of compliance. Listen to these terms, folks. A cult of compliance. Oh, so they admit they aren't. They admit they're cooking the books. Anyway, I want to read more. You will read in here. Part of my things about not reading is I don't want to give you my thoughts for 2 reasons. I want you to think, and you may see something different than I do. And I want you to come kind of clean to this stuff as well. Like I give you just enough, like the jurisdictional stuff in Title 28, I give you just enough to know, go look for something here with this. And then I have to leave you alone because I want you to find it without my taint of opinion you think is opinion. You need to find it clean and clear on your own endeavor. I can get you to the path, but on these things you have to be absolutely without doubt of what you've done. That you know what you know, and it's not psychotic, and it's not influential by the psychotic. You're not part of the breads and circuses brigade of any sector. And the silent ones are part of that. So don't think that because you're not, I don't do the breads and circuses, or I think I don't, you're not part of the breads and circuses brigade. The audience to that, the silent watching audience to that does nothing, that even shows up to the Coliseum to watch, are the same problem. See, we're in this. You either act against it or you're the audience, the peanut gallery to it all. And so, now we get caught. Now this is a wake-up call, folks. I'm telling you, it's a wake-up call. What they're going to do here is the culture of non-compliance is going to look how to do a little bit more compliant. How do we still cook the books now? The parasitic amoeba in the university system looks at the data, analyzes it, and finds out what it does to get around the obstruction that's now been found. This is just the method of how it works. I keep repeating it to you over and over. You want to talk about Hegelian dialectic? This is the nuts and bolts of it. Forget the tithing, the labeling, and going to sleep. They're working this subject against you. What is the point to you could be the drug that was authorized by the FDA in any one of these 43 or whatever studies. And there's more, I just tell you what that doesn't count the 3,000, it's got to be years, thousands and thousands of studies that we found out that China's been dumping on the market, right? Come on, we got a real focus problem here, actually. A Duke Announcements research fraud settlement with $112.5 million payment to U.S. government. They announced fraud settlement. They're committing fraud. What have I called it for you? Okay, so I mean, this is not. I just want to show you. I'm not some. I may sound like it, but I'm not some psychotic doing sensational stuff. I'm trying to point out how it works, the nuts and bolts of the thing that you're up against. That you have some wrenches in your toolbox that you may or may not know that you can start dismantling this thing. And like I told you, it's only referential to you about a letter that a miner comes to me on, and he tells me the first number's no good, and I say, "This is how you use it." Perfect. In 3 sentences, we nailed the whole thing down. If that's where we wanted to stop, is that really so hard? How many more of you have chatted or sent emails that have typed more than 3 short sentences? That if you started to look at whatever comes against you, the way I'm talking, you will be able to deal with it. Make your paper trail. Make your right paper trail. Don't get lost in all you think you know. Don't go, constitutionalist or no law. No, there's restraints and constraints and all kinds of stuff in there. You just have to be knowledgeable. Stop making excuses for that ignorance. Stop making excuse for what you think is knowledge that's actually ignorance. That's the worst one. That's, I think, an outflow of psychotics that are presenting through performance art. If you will, I don't like telling people what to do a lot, although I'm trying to tell you what to do in object form. We got to really think about that. You got to really think about this stuff, folks. It really has you in a bind. The worst part of it is when you think that you're free from it and you're not doing anything else. You're sitting silent watching it all. You have to watch it, but you have to then put a purpose on something, because the damage and invasion is everywhere. It doesn't matter what your ideas and specialties are. There's something out there that is infiltrated to interfere with your life and what we thought was freedom. Freedom and the ability to decide. Does that make life all rosy? No, because our fallen nature says something else. But at least for you, like I went in early, Frumpy, I'm going to do it again. Go back to wrap this thing back around. When you were arguing that the fiat currency, and the Fed, you're worried about it or concerned about inflation or blaming the government for blaming Congress or the Fed, whatever, the debasing of your currency, you had every power to stop that for you. It took me all these years coming to this dynamic, cannabis not having a place, and the progressive treason artists, the treason legislators wanting to put an alternative that won't solve the problem, to say, here's your in to solve the problem. Will you just step up and do it? Will you just step up and do what has to be done in order to make this thing fixed again, and at least begin the exampling of that it can be done, and begin the example of what should be done better. In fact, as I said to you before, the suggestion we're going to try and do through a route is not even directly to the House. It's going to go through the Senate, and we're going to hope we can meet a bill. That's certainly not very direct and very tangible, but it may be the only option we have in order to put a lawful answer up against a fabricated alternative. And if not, we've made that example for everybody. We've made all the example of being able to do what should have been done, and out the people who are supposed to be representing you that they aren't doing that. And until we start getting people to see this thing, and I'll tell you, when they start seeing it, they finally get it clarified, and they start to see it. They start to realize that how they were duped. And this is the main thing I noticed. We have to have a mind shift. I was saying, you got to talk about, do you have a mind shift? I've told you, when you get in this and you start researching it, all your preconceived ideas, when you start to do the research, your mind literally one day starts to feel like it's turning over. It literally is not stable. It has to reorient itself. It feels like it's doing that. That's when you know you're really doing this. Not when you're talking about it. Not when you think it's happened. This is absolutely, you can't help, you sit there, you got to sit back and let it happen, because your mind literally can't handle the old way. It has to reorient itself to the new way. And the new way is the foundation you've created in earnest, not the one you fabricated and just listening to other people. But when you hear them say certain things, you track down what they're saying, and you qualify everything for yourself. In a way, you've heard me do it a little bit. I didn't get too deep in it. I didn't need to get too deep in it. When we're talking about the Israeli Zionist thing and the property over there, Palestine, and all that kind of stuff, that's what I'm doing. That I'm going through and I'm showing you how this is working and how that is going to be something that you're going to be able to find out for yourself in a very short matter, and you don't have to get overwhelmed by all the opinions of people. You can make a very short amount of things that are going on as a short list for yourself. You set that in stone for yourself. You don't need to listen to the psychotics or the breaded circuses. You say, well, this is the facts of the reality. This is how I'm going to perceive this, and this is where I'm going to stay until I get better evidence. And then you move on, and you don't get into the conceptings that drive arguments, because everything you should do should be settled. You can never live in a place of discussion where you can find a place to be settled. And this is why I kind of focus on the land law. For the United States of America, it was peace and settlement. That's what they call it. You settle the land. Settlement is not some group of housings. It's settling the title to the land in the United States. And you are forever exclusively possessed against the whole entire world. But for the Bar Association's encroachment and violations of all that trust, which is our life today, you had absolute autonomy. But for your acceptance of a foreign fiat system, you would have had autonomy. We have Cannabis looking for a bank. I say, well, the value sits in production. Go to gold and silver. There's bunches of states that have done it. Why aren't we actually saying that end of the fence that it is the alternative? I don't know. Why do we keep complaining? What are we willing to do to ourselves? We're willing to take the toxic stuff underneath the determinations of deference of an agency of government that's told us it's going to hurt us, given license to hurt us, and we won't stop it? When the answer is as simple as that, the simplest discussion I have anecdotally here to you today was that someone who's being affected in their property, being addressed by a federal agency, and they come without authority. Right up top, he recognized that. That's it. We're done. How much more you want to develop that is really up to each one of us. How much do you have to take on? Estonia is designing a robot judge to help clear backlog of cases. Folks, what did I tell you about this AI so-called? This is a math algorithm. All right? This is not artificial intelligence. It's not even synthetic intelligence. I told you this whole system of the government's coming against you. Remember, I just talked about the security, the UN Security Council coming up with tracking terrorist financing, and that in the United States of America we already have the Patriot Act that tracks your terrorist financing. Everybody's presumed the terrorist. Estonia is designing a robot judge to help clear backlog of cases. I told you when we heard that story out of New York, which this story refers to, that showed that parking tickets, 100,000 tickets were no good once AI was applied, that we would be seeing the new experts being the so-called AI. It's some guy, some math programmer in some room. We think it's got authority. I told you they're going to give authority to this. So here's the first nation that's going to do it. A robot judge. The Estonian Ministry of Justice has officially asked Ott Velsberg, the country's chief data officer, to design a robot judge to take care of the backlog of small claims disputes. The artificial intelligence-powered judge, in quotes, is supposed to analyze legal documents and other relevant information and come to a decision. Though a human judge will have an opportunity to revise those decisions, the project The project is a striking example of justice by artificial intelligence. I told you this is coming. Here it is already, how fast this is coming on us. Let me point out something in this story for you. What you don't see there, where this is coming on as a robot judge for small claims dispute, if I transfer that to the United States of America, that's all cases that are not criminal, not traffic, not anything more than you fighting with your neighbor, very small, they call it small claims. There's small amounts of money. They're going to apply it to that. You don't hear in this that they're going to apply it to traffic tickets. You don't hear in this they're going to apply it anywhere else, because they're going to give you the shaft on the small claims court, their backlog of problems in that country where people are fighting amongst themselves, and possibly rightfully so, and need justice. That's what the courts are supposed to be. They're going to hand it over to some guy in a data processing office to fix out the algorithm of how this decision is going to be made. And the animal judge, is going to be a bar member, right? And so, it's not going to, there's no non-oversight here. The point is that we're seeing the evidence of the not just as an expert, but as a law precedent-making authority in Estonia. And you notice they only pick a few things. One thing in this case, they will not check whether the system works. There will not be like this augmentation of review by an algorithm to see if there was any mistakes the human made. Remember, I told you that was identified. They say this is supposed to help humans, but it doesn't. It actually displaces it. I did a report about that on some story. I don't know if it was Google or something, but we saw that. I said, no, they're telling you wrong there. Here it is. Here it is. AI is becoming now even a judicial authority. Fascinating how fast they're moving this. Not happening here in the United States yet, but it's right around the corner, folks. Right around. A snitch switch. Smart assistants with moral AI could call police on owners who break the law. If algorithms are just math sequences, functions, how is it moral? Legal is not moral, it's amoral. How could it ever be moral? A smart assistant in AI. And they call it a snitch switch. It's in your devices. Those financial units we call mobile phones. You think maybe they got us wired here, folks? You think they're putting too much authority, now moral authority, in a digit calculator? Folks, doesn't that terrify anybody? I don't know. I start to get speechless. And I know that's almost impossible for you to believe. I know that. But, okay, reduce the time scale down and here we go. I'm going speechless, folks. I can't even tell you how terrifying that really becomes. And it's predictable. Not what's predictable. It's predictable. I did it. I told you about it. Here it is already happening. Here it is already happening. Your mobile phones are these surveillance devices, but they're going to be done as you presumptively a terrorist who does financing somehow, somewhere, to help terrorism, when in fact the one who's doing the surveillance is the terrorist. Figure that flip-flop out. Now, what are you going to do about it, folks? What are you going to do about it? Too big? I ask you to go down to things that really fire you up and you don't like to see. Vaccines, gold, money, end the Fed, cannabis. I don't care what it is. I can look just about anywhere anymore, and I can see how it's done, how it's undone, and how anybody who just wants to step up can do that. There's a real easy way to go about it. It's not instantaneous, but they said, if you will, liberty, if you will, is internal vigilance. Eternal vigilance. Think about that and then do that kind of quick, and let's get into action. Hope something I said today inspires you to kind of work together or work by yourself and move yourself into a place. Get out of psychosis. Don't agree with the psychosis. Get out of the breads and circuses brigade and start to change this thing. It's really quickly and simply done. Gribner, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com, keeping this boat afloat and all you do behind the scenes, and everybody on the network that keeps the broadcast going to keep the word going, whatever word that ends up being, and the syndicators of the broadcast, whenever you do that, and all the reproducers, I appreciate all that. Not much likes or favorites, but thank you very much. All the downvotes, you need to tell me why so I can understand what's going on, and I'll be with you next week, tech diffs or nature willing. another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.